How comfortable are you with being your most authentic self? And when I mean authentic, I mean unapologetically confident, poised, and authentic, and not just at home, not just with your friends and close family, but in the workplace. So before you answer that question, just give me a second and let me explain. About 10 years ago and 5 employers later, I have yet again found myself asking that exact question. As I adjusted my blazer and I combed my hair just to make sure that it was absolutely right, I put on my makeup to make sure it was flawless. I walk into this crowded, stuffy office filled of beige cubicles, walls sky high, saying, "Good morning, how are we today?" at every passing person, just to sit down long enough to catch my breath, put on yet another layer of lip gloss to walk into my boss's office and say those infamous words, "How are we this morning?" It's exhausting. And as the only minority, the only Black woman in a 40-person office whose mission and ethos statement is plastered across the wall, it's supposed to remind us of our commitment, our pride, our joy in protecting and serving the American people. And yet it's ironic because I still question which people. I find myself in a familiar territory yet again, falling prey to those survival tactics known all too well by many people of color in corporate America, code switching, or as these younger call it, are starting to call it the switch. So we're told at a young age that we're supposed to be everything that we can be, fake it until you make it, deny it until you can actually supply it. And even at a younger age for us women, they'll tell you that you can be whatever you want to be and you're groomed for greatness. As I grew up in my teenager years, I was grown, but it came with a price. Don't wear this and don't wear that. Be mindful of what you wear and how you wear it because it doesn't just necessarily look bad on you, and that looks bad on the family. Be careful of what you say and how you say it because people can get easily offended. You need to be slow to speak and quick to hear. As I started to watch as this continued policy and procedures began to pile up, no matter what I was doing, I was no longer this carefree kid who could be whoever she wanted to be. Now I became this overly cautious, overly anxious woman who needed to be prim, proper, and perfect. And that amount of stress that was laid on my shoulders became unbearable. Even I could feel the weight just lingering. I had a fear of being stereotyped so that I had to act the part of being prim and proper, a postured young lady. I often pretended, but no amount of faking it allowed myself to be yet that authentic. I became confused and slightly curious to figure out what's with all the theatrics. Now, as an adult, I've constantly tried to be aware of my mannerisms to ensure that not only am I not to portray myself or the people that I represent in a negative light, I need to start changing the pitch of my voice so it's a lot lighter and less aggressive, smiling harder and more than my cheeks can bear, wearing Bergdorf sweaters and Tom's shoes in the office because once again, the irony is not lost on me. This performance of code switching demands risk, physical manipulation, emotional trauma, and triggers, and yet the understanding that my success at times is in the hands of someone else. The emotional tax that a lot of us have to play when it comes to code switching provides temporary respite. Yeah, however, being inauthentic has its negative effects, not just from the perceptions, but also in performance in the long term. In order for us to secure a seat at the table, we just don't want any seat. We want the seat. We want the head of the table, not sitting behind some 1998 dusty old suit taking notes. And what comes with access? Challenges and shame. Shamed in our lived experiences, forcing us to hide who we are, who we're supposed to be, who we were called to be, our most authentic self. And yet, these same exact emotions that come with the code are stressful, they're demeaning, they're careless. And this level of performance starts to dwindle. And therefore, we begin to perpetuate the stereotypes about women of color and their lack of leadership qualities, interpersonal skills, our inability to be assertive and yet decisive in the boardroom. Overwhelmingly enough, when it comes down to these extra acts of labeling, we were told to be a little bit more chummy chummy with the fellas. So I started to act slightly more masculine so I could fit into the good old boys club. And yet I got pushed back. It came off as inauthentic, and I wasn't getting that sort of support or the sort of acceptance that I thought I would have. So once again, we're back to labels. We've been described as bad-tempered, hostile, overly aggressive, passive, mild-mannered, too passionate, too opinionated. And part of the problem and why the stereotype continues to persist is the lack of awareness and understanding of our own experiences. The process of stigmatizing these types of individuals in the workplace creates a feeling of powerlessness, and yet it continues to layer and level on this emotional tax that we as women often have to play. So while women and people of color comprise of 63% of the population in the workforce, we only account for less than 30% of the decision makers. That's 1 in 3. So for women of color who are particularly in a consistent underrepresented position, is due to these misrepresented labels. According to a 2018 Catalyst report, 58% of minority women reported to being highly on guard in the workplace. So imagine feeling the need to protect yourself at all costs from unfair treatment, negative emotions. You devote your time, your energy, and you're consciously preparing for every day, knowingly that you may come up against a large or small act of bias. So I've received multiple shades of advice from be more approachable, open up, go ask a colleague for coffee, get to know them, they're great. But in the back of my mind, I'm starting to think, you want this brown woman to ask this Northern European executive to coffee? Nope. What am I supposed to do with this? We don't have anything in common. What can we possibly talk about? Yet this daily vigilance to protect against what others might say or do, whether they include us or not, they lead to avoiding social interactions at all costs, making us adjust our appearance just so we could fit in. We become slower to speak, and yet we're trying to fit into the standard norm. But yet this is the emotional Black tax that many of us has had to pay over the years, and we come with no receipts. So given that our racial identity impacts our experience, it's essential for us to understand how our social position and racial identity affects how we respond emotionally and how we express said emotions in the workplace. It's not just how we can identify them, but how can we manage them? So when companies start to fill these leadership positions, what are the first 3 things that they mention? Honesty, transparency, openness. But how can we as women of color be those exact 3 things when the organization that we've devoted to serve aren't necessarily open to the idea of seeing someone that looks like us in a leadership position? Remember, it's that 1 in 3. It wasn't until a new executive started in my division who was full of energy, spoke different languages, very well rounded. His verbose mannerisms could light up a room. He approached me one day and asked for coffee. I was slightly taken back because I was unaware. And most of the time, I just was not necessarily sure if this was really what I wanted to do. He started asking me questions about where I'm from and what I did prior to this job and what I wanted to do in the future. So as he continued to ask these very genuine questions and a friendship starts to build, my guard slowly lowered. And months went by and we continued to have our cute coffee chats. We became more friendly, and then one day he invited me to do a presentation on his behalf. I asked him why me, and he simply said, because I see a leader in you. To this day, he remains one of my most trusted mentors and advisors. So when we talk about authenticity, being who you are supposed to be, for us as minorities, it aligns with our relational transparency and our self-management, and matching those 2 things with our core principles. We've identified that self-awareness is one of the most salient qualities of an authentic leader. And yet it's important for us to remember that we have something that others are judging us on. And in the long term, on a microscopic level, posturing and faking it only provides temporary value. Yet when we recognize that the confluence of our racial, ethnic, and/or immigrant identity, self-awareness for us, it's complex, it's fluid, and it's contextually dependent, given the radicalized subtext that accompany interactions between us in the US. So for us as women of color, our self-awareness has been radicalized. So how do we eliminate the labels to gain access at the seat? We must start by addressing the labels and the emotions that are associated with the stigma. This increases our emotional agility, slowly but surely allowing us to point out our own biases. Yet no longer are we a part of the problem, but we are now the solution. Research has often shown that experiencing different emotions help people successfully navigate complex scenarios. So when we hear companies talk about how to truly understand and address workplace inequality, it's vital from the starting point of the organization to be able to recognize the crossroad that we as minorities and we as women of color and underrepresented groups are affected by, how we respond to, and how we deal with workplace challenges today. So when our strong emotions start to come up, don't fight them. Don't run from them. Don't push them back. Instead, approach them with curiosity, zeal, and vigor. Get more insight into what has triggered you, the who, the what, and the where. To my women of color blazing the leadership trails, you will get triggered at work. You will face discomfort, direct racism, overt racism, sexism. You're going to feel a range of emotions, most being the result of your race, your gender, and or ethnicity. But being your most authentic self at work will require you to tap into the most powerful resource that you have, your emotions. When we're able to acknowledge and understand our emotional triggers, not only can we learn from them now, but we'll be able to learn from them much later down the road. And is that not what it means to be vulnerable, transparent, open, honest? That's what it means to be an authentic leader. Our emotions will be our guide toward developing our own emotional agility while tapping into our core beliefs and our values for further insight that will allow us to make better decisions in the future. And to my organizations that are looking to uplift and support and truly promote authenticity in the workplace, I want you to understand this, that suppressing emotions, it decreases not just our access to sound decision-making, but having crucial conversations, strategic influencing, and relationship building. When we're unable to acknowledge our emotions and our emotional triggers, we can then embody what's honest and transparent and open when it comes to leadership. And it starts with being our most authentic self. There's an opportunity for us to take advantage of this uncertain time, this transition, and this part of being emotionally safe in a workplace. You have a responsibility to make sure that all of your employees, whether they are of color or not, are supported emotionally while seizing the chance for them to grow and enhance. Companies need to make sure that they're seizing this exact opportunity to educate their current leaders about their own biases, about their specific roadblocks that people of color face. Having a higher level of emotional intelligence isn't just a thing for you to say and write on a resume, but it can help you develop a newfound language while creating impactful solutions needed to eradicate the massive racial inequality that persists in the workplace today. So I leave you with this one and final question. What will be your leadership legacy? Be intentional about the change you are to be. Be unapologetically confident and authentic in all that you do and in all that you say. Thank you.